On July 8th of 2006, a prominent politician was found in her home unconscious. It appeared she had a massive heart attack, but what police found next was disturbing. This is the case of Chaz Augustine. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also juggling. There aren't too many things that I can't do. But today, we're going over the case of Chaz Augustine and her husband, Chaz Higgs. You're going to learn about a lot of things, a lot of twists and turns, so I suggest staying until the end. You're in for some surprises. For our story, we're heading to Reno, Nevada. Reno is a city that borders California, and it's known as the biggest little city in the world. Very popular for tourism and casinos. It's named after the Civil War Union Major General Jesse L. Reno, who was killed in action during the American Civil War at the Battle of South Mountain. With a population of around 265,000 people, it's a pretty cool place. If you ever decide to buy a van and tour the country and just so happen to end up here, I think you'll have some fun. You could, which I don't recommend, go to the casinos and probably lose money. You could visit the National Automobile Museum and see some cars you wouldn't see on the regular. Perhaps you could even visit Mount Rose Ski Resort and get your ski on. Sadly, none of that is why we're in town today. Chaz Marie Augustine, originally born Alfano, was born on May 19th of 1956 in Los Angeles, California, to Philip and Catherine Alfano. She had two younger brothers named Phil Jr. and Tony. Every Sunday, they'd attend Catholic Mass and were a part of a very religious family. Chaz went to John F. Kennedy High School in La Palma and was a standout student participating in student government. When she graduated in 1974, she was a salutatorian, which means she was the student who ranked second highest, with only the valedictorian being ranked higher. She went to the University of California at Irvine for the fall semester, but she would then transfer to Occidental College. Around this time, her father decided to abandon the Democratic Party, and Chaz decided to follow suit. They were now a family of Republicans. She started to get into politics and was selected for a Lyndon B. Johnson Fellowship in the Washington, D.C. office by a congressman named Jerry Patterson. About a year after this, in 1976, she worked on Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign that failed. Towards the end of the 1970s, Chaz went to work for Western Airlines, which later merged with Delta Airlines, as a flight scheduler for about 12 years and also briefly as a flight attendant. During her time here, she met a couple different men. The first one was named Gary Voss, and he was an airplane mechanic. They got married pretty quickly after meeting, and in 1979, Chaz ended up getting pregnant. About 9 months would pass, and in October, she'd give birth to their daughter, Dallas Christine Voss. 4 months after that, in February of 1980, Chaz found out that Gary had been seeing other women behind her back. By the summer of this same year, they would get divorced. Gary would move in with one of the women he was seeing, leaving behind Chaz to pretty much raise Dallas on her own. Chaz didn't take this very lightly, and the new woman in Gary's life filed a restraining order against her that required she stay at least 100 feet away from Gary's apartment and the new woman's place of work. The thing is, they all worked together at Western Airlines, so that must have been a bit awkward. Chaz replied to this restraining order by accusing the other woman of harassing her and saying that she only wanted Gary to be in Dallas's life. She had to raise their child alone because Gary decided to be an excuse for a father. He gave basically no child support and had virtually no contact with his daughter. Yup, deadbeat. Chaz then went back to college, specifically California State University, to work on a master's degree in public administration. By 1984, she earned her master's degree and started to move up to management positions at Western Airlines. She was responsible for scheduling flight crews, and this included the pilots. This is where she would marry her second husband in 1987, and his name was Kevin Hahn. He was a Marine, and their marriage lasted less than 6 months because of cheating issues. By February of 1988, the divorce was finalized and they went their separate ways. Almost immediately, Chaz announced to the world that she was getting married. yet again. This time, it was to a Delta Airlines pilot named Chuck Augustine. Charles Francis Chuck Augustine, to be exact, was born on February 8th of 1940. He went to Marion Catholic High School and was a standout football player that received a scholarship for Notre Dame. Here he'd play from 1958 to 1962. Standing at 6'6" and over 250 pounds, he was blessed by genetics, but sadly he had pretty bad knee problems which ended his football career. After college, he became an airline pilot and served in the United States Air Force during the Vietnam War. He began flying for Western Airlines in 1968, only a month after he left the Air Force. In 1985, Charles met Kathy, and he was about 16 years older than her. He was going through a divorce with a different woman that he met in Texas in 1965. Together, they had 3 children, but had a lot of problems. Now, a bit after Chuck and Kathy got married, Kathy and Dallas moved in with Chuck at a house he owned in Las Vegas. Chuck would then legally adopt Dallas, and she would take his last name of Augustine. Their marriage would last for a long time, and from the outside, it would appear healthy and stable. Kathy decided to re-enter politics, and it was then that she found success. In 1992, she was elected to the Nevada Assembly with a state senate following. After this, in 1998, she became the Nevada State Controller. She was a bill collector for the state and collected a lot of bad debt. A bit after George W. Bush became the 43rd president, Kathy was potentially going to become the United States Treasurer. Everything appeared great, but in reality, it wasn't. Kathy was a harsh person who would yell at and demean her employees. She asked her state employees to work on her upcoming election using the state times and the state's money. This would actually lead to something bigger that happens a bit later down the line. But while she was working on politics, obviously her marriage started to go into shambles. Kathy started to become very critical of Chuck, saying some harsh things to him. She'd say things about how she was becoming important and Chuck was now a nobody. She'd also make comments about how he was gaining weight and other very rude things. Kathy filed for a divorce and gave the papers to Chuck, but she later took them back because Chuck decided he was going to be difficult. Those are his own words. By early 2003, Kathy was spending most of her time in Reno, avoiding him. He was living in Las Vegas. He had become very unhappy and depressed, and one of his sons suggested that he come live with him and his family. Chuck thought that this was a great idea, and he started to think about a new life. But a little less than a month later, he suffered a stroke. He was having difficulty speaking and remembering things. On July 15th, he went in for an MRI, but while getting ready to get it, he suffered another stroke, and this one was major. Chuck was then rushed into the intensive care unit, but he lost his ability to speak. Kathy heard this news while she was in her office, and she then hurried to the Reno airport to catch the first flight to Las Vegas. After spending 3 weeks in the ICU in August, Chuck was then moved to a normal hospital room. He didn't appear to be getting any worse, but he also didn't appear to be getting any better. Chuck's son, Greg, was constantly visiting his father in the hospital, and he would also stop by his father's house. Kathy was staying at Chuck's house while all of this was going on. Greg started to notice that things were disappearing around the house, such as Chuck's favorite reclining chair and a shopsmith, which is a large table saw, and also other various things. Kathy was giving away all of these things to her brothers and friends. She was basically planning for Chuck's death. This really irritated Greg, but what irritated him the most is how we get our next character in the story. Kathy's 4th husband, Chaz Higgs. William Charles Higgs was born in 1964, and he was an identical twin born to William Higgs. They grew up in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and by all accounts had a normal childhood. Chaz was a smart kid, and in high school, he was an accomplished student. Some people, however, thought that he sold himself short and that he could have went on to do much bigger and better things. He thought that he was a lot smarter than most people and that he could get away with things. By early adulthood, Chaz was about 6 foot tall and very muscular. Rumors go around that he was on steroids, but you never know. After he graduated high school in 1982, he joined the Navy. He began training as a hospital corpsman at Camp Lejeune, which is located right outside of Jacksonville. It was here that he met a woman named Dawn Renee Brown, who was also a corpsman in training. About 2 years later, in 1984, the two of them got married in South Carolina. Their marriage was iffy from the start, and at one point, Dawn caught Chaz in bed with a nursing student. Even though she was extremely upset about this, she decided to forgive him anyway. This would become something that Chaz kept on doing though. Eventually, they transferred to a naval base in Jacksonville, and things only got worse. Chaz met a married woman named Kirsten Dawn Gonzalez. Behind both of their spouses' backs, they began dating. Eventually, they'd both get divorced from their spouses and then marry each other. About 18 months would pass, and Chaz would file for bankruptcy the first time, and 4 months later, Kirsten divorced him. In July of 1993, Chaz was transferred to duty in the Persian Gulf, specifically in Bahrain, and here he'd spend 4 years. He met another woman named Laura, and she was in her early 20s and had an infant daughter. In 1997, when Chaz finished his tour, all three of them returned to the United States. By the fall of 1998, he filed for bankruptcy for the second time. The next year, in 1999, he left the Navy, and on February 4th, he had moved to Eureka, California, but only 2 months later, he lived in Louisville, Kentucky. In the summer of 2000, Chaz drove Laura and her daughter to Las Vegas, but he decided to move to North Carolina. Here, he enrolled in a nursing program at Craven Community College. He earned an associate's degree from Craven in 2002 and then decided to go to Las Vegas himself. He lived in an old school bus that he converted into a mobile home. That's honestly pretty cool. Chaz then got a job working at Sunrise Hospital, which is the same hospital that Chuck got taken to after his strokes. Chaz was Chuck's nurse while he was attempting to rehab, and this is how Chaz and Kathy met. Only 10 days later, on August 19th of 2003, Chuck ended up passing away. During the wake, just to be even more disrespectful, Chaz and his twin brother were invited. Literally an exact month after Chuck passed away, Chaz and Kathy took a trip to Hawaii and got married on September 19th. And because the divorce was never finalized, due to Chuck's inheritance, Kathy was now a millionaire. By the next year, 2004, a few of Kathy's employees had become very angry with her and decided to out her. It was made public about how she was violating state's ethics rules, and she became the first official in Nevada history to be impeached. She was convicted on one charge, but acquitted on 2 others, and was forced to pay a $15,000 fine. The governor of the state asked her to resign from office, but she refused and insisted she'd have no trouble working with the same employees who were mad at her. A few years would pass, and in 2006, Kathy began her run for Nevada treasurer, but something happened. On Saturday, July 8th, she was scheduled to attend a fundraiser, but she never showed up. The reason for this is because during the early morning hours, Kathy stopped breathing. Chaz found her on the bed and immediately called 911.
Something's wrong with my wife. She's not breathing. I don't know what happened to her.
She's not breathing at all?
Not breathing at all.
By the time the ambulance had gotten to the hospital, Kathy was in a coma. Chaz called her mother and told her what happened, and she said that they'll be up there right away. But Chaz replied, "Well, no, there's no need for you to come up." He was obviously hiding something. Chaz did a press conference afterwards and told reporters he thought that Kathy may have become ill due to the stress of hard work and long days.
She came to work every day, did her job as she would here, and then after work, she would go to 1 or 2 events an evening. So getting in late at night.
3 days after she arrived to the hospital, her family made the decision to take her off of life support. On July 11th of 2006, Kathy Augustine was pronounced dead. An autopsy was conducted, and it was revealed that there was nothing natural about the way that she died. There was no evidence of a heart attack, no evidence of heart damage, no blockage, and no evidence that the heart muscle had died. So if it wasn't a heart attack, then what was it? On July 15th, Kathy was laid to rest, and during her funeral service, Chaz wasn't there. The reason for this is because he tried to commit the endgame a day prior. Police now started to look at him very suspiciously. They began to look deeper into their marriage and what was occurring. Kathy's brother, Phil Alfano, had said that there were problems between them. One time, Chaz overdrew their checkings account by a very significant amount, and Kathy had asked him to leave, but then took him back in. Another incident that took place only a few months before Kathy died is when she called Phil crying while Chaz was driving. She said, "Chaz is trying to kill us, not me or himself, but both of us, and that he was driving very erratically." Phil said that she was hysterical, and he's never heard her that upset before. The same day that Kathy died, the 11th, the Reno police would receive a phone call that would change everything. A nurse that met Chaz for the first time on July 7th, named Kim Ramey, had said that Chaz made an offhand comment about a murder case in the news involving a husband accused of stabbing his estranged wife. He described the suspect as stupid for committing the murder in the manner in which he had. Chaz then told Kim a much better way to commit murder. He made a specific reference to a drug called Sectional Choline, which was virtually undetectable. Sectional Choline, if used correctly, paralyzes respiratory muscles to allow for the insertion of breathing tubes. But it's very powerful, and if not used correctly, can cause organ failure and sometimes even death. It very quickly leaves the bloodstream and doesn't leave much trace. Police then decided to launch a full-scale investigation. Without telling anyone, they did a few things. First, they requested an arrest warrant for Chaz Higgs. Second, they sent Kathy's blood and urine samples to an FBI crime lab in Virginia. 2 months would pass, and it was found out that Kathy did have the drug in her system. In September of 2006, Chaz Higgs was then arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty. During his trial, which began in 2007, prosecutors had to show that Sectional Choline is what killed Kathy. The FBI toxicologist who tested Kathy's samples said that she had no doubt that the drug was in her system at the time of Kathy's death. So now would remain the question, how exactly did it get in her system? A pathologist pointed to a mark that was on Kathy's left hip as the possible injection site and said that there wasn't any evidence it happened during her hospital treatment. The only thing here is that they didn't have the bottle of Sectional Choline or the syringe, but they did have proof that Chaz knew what the drug was and that he knew how to use it. While detectives were investigating further, they talked to Chaz's coworkers, and they all pretty much said the same thing. Chaz couldn't stop talking about how much he hated his wife. On July 8th, the day that Kathy stopped breathing, when the emergency responders arrived, they were surprised to find Chaz standing on the sidewalk and not administering CPR to Kathy. What was even more alarming was that Kathy was still on the bed. The reason for this is because standard procedure says that you would always put the person on a hard surface to perform CPR, something that Chaz 100% would have known. Some more disturbing evidence came to light when emails were revealed by a woman named Linda Ramirez. She used to work with Chaz, and he never stopped his ways. They began a relationship together. In their emails were very nasty remarks about Kathy and how Chaz really felt about her. Eventually, he'd take the stand and start by telling the court about the early, happy days spent with Kathy. But over time, he said, the stress of political life, and especially the impeachment scandal, took a toll on their marriage. He tried to leave Kathy multiple times, but over and over again, she begged him to stay. Chaz said he encouraged Kathy to leave politics, and he was convinced that it was the only way to save their marriage. Finally, when he heard that she decided to run for the state treasurer, he had enough. He said that he told her on the evening of July 7th that he was going to leave. Then a few hours later, in the early morning of July 8th, he found Kathy in her room, not breathing. Chaz said that he did all he could to save her, and that there was nothing suspicious about him not placing her on the floor to perform CPR. Once again, the night before the trial would come to a close, Chaz decided to try and commit the endgame. He'd appear back in court a few days later with bandages, and it was now time to sentence him. The jury reached a verdict after 8 hours, and on June 29th of 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after 20 years. Chaz is a coward, and as for how he managed to inject Kathy, well, that's unknown. He doesn't deserve even a second out of jail, and in fact, deserves every moment there. I just wanted to also point out that Chuck Augustine's death was also looked into being the fact that Chaz was his nurse. No foul play was found, however, and it was ruled that he died of natural causes. A weird thing about this story, however, is what happened after. Kathy had a daughter with her first husband, Gary Voss, and Once again, her name was Dallas. Dallas attempted to follow in the footsteps of her mother and enter politics. She struggled with her mother's death for years, and she would vent her anger by working out and being in martial arts. That's not all. She wanted to become a politician, and her slogan was Dallas Augustine, a new legacy. That legacy, however, would be one that you definitely don't want. Dallas was 32 years old at the time and was married to a 50-year-old woman named Jessie McCaskill. They were in an awful relationship where they'd argue constantly and fight all of the time. One day in August of 2012, the two of them were at their house together. What exactly happened isn't known, but what is known is that for some reason, Dallas shot and killed Jessie and then turned around and did the same to herself. At the time, Dallas was a corrections officer at the Arizona Department of Corrections. She was having an affair with another woman, and it tore their marriage apart. After finding out about this, her wife Jessie kicked her out of the house. Dallas then went to stay at a hotel, and Jessie burned their wedding photos. Eventually, the two reconciled, but only for a very short period of time before Dallas decided to strike. It's very bizarre how this occurred, given the history of what transpired to her mother. The way that fate works is so ironic. Another bizarre thing that happened because of this is that the hospital where Kathy was taken to, or Washoe Medical Center, had fired 22 employees because of this situation. The reason for this is because of a circulation of Kathy's files and privacy violations concerning her condition. One of those employees actually committed the endgame because of this, which is pretty wild to think about. Kathy Augustine was to most a kind-hearted, upbeat woman. While her career in politics was nothing short of scandals, what happened to her is still very upsetting and not deserved. There was no reason for her tragic ending, and I really hope that she's resting peacefully. As for Chaz Higgs, well, I heard that hell was pretty hot. But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please subscribe and hit the like button because that's all we do. I also have a second account with my brother named Horrifying, where we tell stories about everything paranormal. This includes true crime, mysteries, and things that are just downright spooky. I'd greatly appreciate if you subscribe to that too. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.